Marcus Reed drove his new black luxury sedan down a quiet city street. The evening lights shimmered on the polished hood, and the soft music from the car's speakers matched his calm mood. He had worked hard for this car, years of long hours, at his tech company, saving every extra dollar. Today was special. He had finally bought something for himself, something that felt like a reward. The streets were nearly empty, but the sound of a police siren suddenly broke through the music. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Marcus frowned. He was driving under the speed limit. He had stopped at every light. Why were they pulling him over? He slowed down and steered to the side of the road. His heart beat a little, faster though he had done nothing wrong. The officers parked behind him, lights still flashing. Two uniformed men stepped out. One was tall, with sharp eyes and a firm jaw. The other was younger, holding a flashlight in one hand, even though the street lamps were bright. Marcus rolled down his window and rested both hands on the steering wheel. He wanted to make sure everything stayed calm. "Good evening, officers," Marcus said politely. "Is there a problem?" The tall officer leaned closer, glancing at the interior of the car. "License and registration," he said in a flat voice. "Of course." Marcus passed over the documents. "May I ask what this is about?" The officer didn't answer right away. He scanned the license, then looked at Marcus again. "This your car?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I just bought it yesterday." The younger officer shined his flashlight through the window, checking the dashboard, the seats, even the floor. "That's a pretty expensive car," he said slowly. "You sure this belongs to you?" Marcus felt a sting in his chest. He kept his voice calm. "Yes. The paperwork is all there. You can check." The tall officer stepped back and spoke quietly to his partner. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see suspicion on their faces. They weren't just checking for a broken taillight. They didn't believe him. Cars passed by, slowing down as drivers tried to see what was happening. A couple of people on the sidewalk stopped to watch. Marcus felt every eye on him. The younger officer tapped the side of the car with his flashlight. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." Marcus sighed softly. He didn't want any trouble. He opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. The air was cool, but his palms were warm. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. "Where are you coming from?" the tall officer asked. "From work," Marcus answered. "I'm heading home." "What do you do for work?" the younger one asked this time, voice sharper. "I run a software company," Marcus said simply. "We design security programs." The tall officer looked surprised for half a second, but quickly hid it. He made a call on his radio, reading Marcus's license plate and name. His partner walked around the car slowly, inspecting every detail. Marcus stood still, hands by his sides. He thought about how strange this was, being treated like a suspect for driving a nice car. He had worked since college, building his own company from scratch. He never thought success would earn him this kind of attention. On the sidewalk, a woman pulled out her phone and started recording. Marcus noticed, but he kept his expression calm. He knew how quickly small moments could turn into something bigger. The radio crackled softly, and the tall officer listened closely. "Running his name now," he murmured to his partner. Marcus took a slow breath. He remembered what his father used to tell him: "Stay calm. Always stay calm." That advice had guided him through tough meetings, stressful deadlines, and now this unexpected stop. The younger officer's flashlight beam wavered slightly. His hand trembled. Marcus noticed it. Not from anger, but from nerves. Something about that unsettled him. Why were they nervous? This didn't feel like an ordinary stop. A low rumble echoed in the distance. It was faint but steady, like heavy tires rolling fast on asphalt. Marcus tilted his head, listening. The officers didn't seem to notice at first. "Sir," the tall officer said again. "What did you say you do for a living?" "I told you," Marcus replied, voice even. "I run a software company. The paperwork is in the glove box if you need proof." The officer nodded but didn't look convinced. He was waiting for the radio confirmation. The younger one glanced up and down the street nervously. Marcus's mind started connecting dots. The trembling hand, the flashing lights, the strange tension. Maybe this wasn't just about him. Maybe something else was happening tonight. The rumble grew louder. This time, both officers heard it. The younger one looked up sharply. "You hear that?" The tall officer pressed a hand to his earpiece, listening to the radio again. His face went pale. He muttered something under his breath. Marcus only caught part of it. "Robbery suspect, same street, black SUV." Marcus blinked. He was driving a black car, yes, but not an SUV. Were they confusing him with someone else? He felt frustration rise in his chest, but he forced it down. Anger wouldn't help. Clarity would. "I think you have the wrong guy," Marcus said carefully. "This is a sedan, not an SUV. I can show you all my papers." The officer didn't answer. He was staring down the street now. The rumble was no longer faint. Tires screeched in the distance. Marcus turned his head and saw headlights whipping around the corner. Fast, too fast. A black SUV roared toward them, swerving between lanes like a wild animal. The younger officer froze. His hand shook harder. The tall officer stepped back, eyes wide, reaching for his radio. In that split second, Marcus realized everything had just changed. The roar of the black SUV grew louder as it raced toward the intersection. Its engine sounded rough, desperate, like someone forcing it to move faster than it should. The vehicle swerved wildly, barely missing a streetlight before correcting course. Marcus stood near his own car, hands still visible, but his attention was now on the approaching danger. The two officers turned toward the sound as well, their posture stiff and uneasy. The younger one tightened his grip on the flashlight, and the beam danced across the pavement. "Stay right here," the tall officer barked at Marcus, though his voice carried more fear than authority. He pressed his radio closer to his mouth. "Unit 3, suspect vehicle sighted, heading west on Hampton. Request immediate backup." Marcus did not move. He wanted to speak, to remind them that his car wasn't the one they were looking for, but he stayed silent. The moment felt fragile, as if one wrong word could snap it in half. The younger officers' eyes kept darting between Marcus and the distant headlights, as though he couldn't decide which was more dangerous. The rumble became a roar. Tires screeched again, echoing down the street. Pedestrians on the sidewalk backed away quickly. A woman holding her phone stepped behind a bus stop, still recording. A man across the road froze in place, watching everything unfold. The SUV appeared in full view now, its front bumper dented, hood rattling violently with every bounce. It was obvious the driver had no control, or simply didn't care. The tall officer stepped forward, waving his arm. "Stop the vehicle!" he shouted, as though the driver could hear and obey through the chaos. Marcus's instincts sharpened. He noticed something the officers didn't. The SUV wasn't slowing down. In fact, it was accelerating, heading straight toward the line of parked cars on their side of the road. If the driver swerved even slightly, someone could get hurt. "Move!" Marcus shouted suddenly, voice cutting through the noise. His warning startled both officers. The younger one spun toward him, confused. "What?" "Get out of the street!" Marcus yelled again, pointing. "He's not stopping!" The tall officer realized it at the same time Marcus did. His face went pale. He grabbed his partner's arm, yanking him back toward the sidewalk just as the SUV barreled past, missing Marcus's sedan by inches. The rush of air was powerful, the smell of burnt rubber thick and choking. The SUV clipped a parked car farther down, smashing its side mirror and sending shards of glass scattering. It didn't slow down. It kept going, engine screaming as it disappeared around the next corner. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the street, broken only by distant sirens racing closer. The younger officer looked shaken. He glanced at Marcus with wide eyes. You told us to move." Marcus nodded once, calm but serious. We're standing right in its path." The tall officer's radio crackled again. "Unit 3, confirmed suspect heading west. Be advised, armed robbery in progress at Northside Market. Vehicle matches description." The tall officer pressed the button, speaking fast. "Confirmed. Visual contact 2 minutes ago, suspect moving west at high speed. Pursuit required." He turned back to Marcus, the suspicion in his eyes replaced by something else. Uncertainty. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay here," he said, voice less harsh than before. "We need to finish this check." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Even after that?" "It's procedure," the officer replied, though he didn't sound convinced. His partner avoided eye contact, still shaken from how close they'd been to disaster. Marcus could see the crowd growing on the sidewalk. More phones pointed in their direction. People whispered, wondering what had just happened and why the officers seemed nervous. Marcus stayed calm, though inside he felt a mix of frustration and worry. The SUV driver was clearly dangerous. Someone else could get hurt if the police didn't act fast. "Look," Marcus said evenly, "you can see my registration. You can see my ID. I'm not the one you're looking for. That guy is getting away." The younger officer glanced at the paperwork in his hand. He knew Marcus was right. The car wasn't an SUV. The name matched the license. Everything was clean. Yet, hesitation lingered in the tall officer's stance. Maybe he didn't want to admit a mistake in front of an audience. Before Marcus could speak again, the distant roar returned. The SUV was looping back, tires screeching as it turned onto a side street nearby. This time, its path was unpredictable. "Backup is 3 blocks away," the radio reported. "Do not engage without support," the tall officer swore under his breath. He looked down the road, calculating. If they stayed here, the suspect would slip past again. If they left Marcus, someone might question why they'd stopped him in the first place. Marcus saw it all in their faces. The conflict, the fear, the pressure. He also saw something else. Opportunity. If that SUV came this way again, it would be chaos. "Officers," Marcus said firmly, "listen to me. If you want to stop that guy, you don't have time to argue with me. Let me help you." The younger officer looked startled. "Help us?" "I know these streets," Marcus said. "I've lived here my whole life. If he comes back this way, there's only 2 routes he can take." The tall officer stared at him, torn between doubt and necessity. The sirens were closer now, the tension sharper. He glanced at Marcus's car, clean, papers in order, and then back at the crowd watching every move they made. Another roar, louder this time. The SUV was indeed coming back, its headlights slicing through the night like a warning. "Fine," the tall officer said quickly. "Don't move from here, just stay clear of the road." Marcus nodded once, though in his mind he was already planning what he'd do if things went bad. The officers stepped into position, radios ready, waiting for the SUV to appear. Again. The distant headlights grew brighter. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The headlights grew brighter, the engine noise pounding like thunder in the narrow street. The black SUV roared toward them again, faster this time, weaving left and right as if the driver had no fear of losing control. Marcus stood near his sedan, his eyes fixed on the oncoming vehicle. The 2 officers, still shaken from the first close call, raised their hands to signal the driver to stop. But Marcus knew it was useless. The driver wasn't slowing down. "Get ready," Marcus shouted. The tall officer pointed his flashlight and yelled into his radio. "Suspect approaching Hampton again! Block off both ends now!" But there was no time for backup. The SUV was almost there. The younger officer stepped back quickly. fear showing on his face. The crowd on the sidewalk scattered, some ducking behind parked cars, others holding up their phones to record. Marcus stayed calm, but his mind worked fast. If the SUV didn't stop, someone could be hurt, maybe even killed. He saw the path clearly in his head. 2 possible escape routes past this block. The driver would choose whichever was open. The SUV swerved hard, barely missing the corner. Lamppost. Sparks flew as its bumper scraped the curb. The driver wasn't even trying to avoid attention. At the last moment, the tall officer grabbed Marcus's arm. "Stay back!" But Marcus pulled free, stepping closer to his car. His eyes never left the SUV. "If you block him here," Marcus said, voice steady, "he can't turn down Oak Street. He'll have to go left, toward the alley." The officer looked at him in surprise, but before he could answer, the SUV sped past, tires screeching so loud it hurt the ears. In a flash, Marcus jumped into action. He opened his car door and swung it wide just as the SUV brushed the curb again. The wide-open door created a sudden obstacle, forcing the suspect to swerve harder than planned. The black SUV clipped a trash can, lost balance for a second, and slowed just enough to make its turn clumsy. The tall officer shouted into his radio, "Suspect turning left, West Alley, close in!" Marcus quickly shut his car door and stepped aside. He wasn't trying to be a hero, just fast enough to change the chase. His action bought the police precious seconds. The younger officer looked at him, stunned. You just... "No time," Marcus said sharply, eyes on the alley. "He'll get stuck if we move fast." The tall officer hesitated, torn between securing Marcus and chasing the suspect. He finally waved his partner forward. "Stay here," he ordered Marcus again. Then both officers ran toward the corner, radios buzzing with new calls for backup. Marcus didn't move, at least not right away. He stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, watching the scene unfold. Sirens screamed louder from every direction now. He could already hear other police vehicles closing in, tires squealing on nearby streets. The crowd around Marcus was buzzing with excitement. Some people were shouting, "Did you see that?" while others kept recording everything. A woman whispered, "That man just saved those cops." But Marcus ignored it all. He wasn't doing it for attention. A minute later, the radio chatter grew intense. Suspect boxed in near West Alley. Driver attempting to flee on foot. Marcus glanced down the street and saw the SUV at a crooked angle, its front tire blown out from hitting a sharp corner. The driver, masked and wearing dark clothes, jumped out and ran between 2 buildings. The 2 officers froze briefly, unsure which way to go. There were multiple exits from that block. The suspect could vanish easily. Marcus, who knew the streets better than anyone, pointed quickly. "He'll head toward Lincoln Avenue," Marcus said loudly. "It's the only open way if he keeps running straight." The tall officer stared at him, then nodded without another word. Both officers sprinted toward the alley, following Marcus's directions. Marcus didn't chase them. He stayed by his car, keeping calm. But his heart pounded harder now, not from fear, but from focus. He hated seeing chaos in his neighborhood. He hated how suspicion had almost distracted the police from the real threat. As the sound of running, footsteps faded. More police cars arrived, sirens cutting through the night. Backup officers jumped out, blocking both ends of the street and checking on bystanders. One of them approached Marcus. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, voice even. He gestured toward the alley. "They're chasing him that way." The officer looked confused. "You saw the suspect?" "Not his face," Marcus said quickly. "But I know this area. He can't get far unless he cuts through Lincoln." The new officer relayed that on his radio. Moments later, another report crackled through. "Suspect intercepted on Lincoln Avenue. Officers in pursuit, requesting immediate backup." Marcus allowed himself a small breath of relief. At least they were on the right path. The younger officer returned first, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead. He looked at Marcus differently now. not with suspicion, but with gratitude and disbelief. You were right. He almost slipped through, but your call saved us a lot of time. Marcus only gave a small nod. Good. Focus on catching him. A few seconds later, the tall officer came back too, voice sharp as he spoke into his radio, coordinating with the rest of the units. When he looked at Marcus, there was no more doubt in his eyes, only respect. But before he could speak, the radio confirmed, "Suspect in custody. Weapon recovered. Scene secure." The tension on the street eased. Sirens still echoed, but the danger was ending. People on the sidewalk clapped softly, relieved no one was hurt. Several pointed their phones toward Marcus, whispering about what he had done. The tall officer finally walked up to him. "Sir," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Thank you. That could have gone much worse." Marcus crossed his arms, calm but firm. "I told you I wasn't your guy." The officer nodded, guilt flashing across his face. "You were right. We misjudged." Marcus didn't gloat. He just looked down the street where the suspect had been caught. "Next time," he said evenly, "judge less, act faster." The younger officer lowered his eyes, clearly embarrassed. The crowd kept recording, the flashing lights painting the whole street red and blue. Marcus could already tell this moment would spread far beyond this block, but he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about what would come next, and how quickly things could change when people assumed the worst. The street was still flashing red and blue as more police cars arrived, sealing off the block. Marcus stood near his sedan, calm on the outside, though his heart was still beating hard from the close call. The younger officer spoke quickly into his radio, confirming that the suspect was in custody. The tall officer, however, wasn't ready to relax yet. His eyes scanned every corner, every alley. Marcus noticed it, the way the man's shoulders stayed tense, like someone waiting. "For bad news, sir," the tall officer said, turning to Marcus. "We'll need a statement. Stay right here until we're done." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus replied simply. He looked at the bent trash can and scattered glass where the SUV had clipped the curb. "But you should check the area. If that guy has friends, this isn't over." The younger officer frowned. "Friends?" Marcus nodded. "Criminals don't usually work alone. If that driver was desperate enough to tear through a crowded street, someone else might be nearby, maybe waiting to grab him or cause a distraction." The tall officer looked uneasy. He wanted to dismiss Marcus, but something in his calm, certain voice stopped him. The man didn't sound like he was guessing. He sounded like he knew. The sound of more sirens echoed closer. 2 unmarked police. Vehicles pulled in, and a plainclothes detective stepped out, giving quick instructions. Marcus stayed quiet, watching. Suddenly, a distant shout rang out from the far end of the street. "Officer down!" someone yelled. People gasped, stepping back. The crowd that had gathered scattered even more, phones pointing in every direction. The tall officer stiffened. "What happened?" he barked into his radio. "Second suspect spotted near West Alley. Ran into the crowd. Officer injured," came the urgent reply. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I knew it." The tall officer glanced at him. For a moment, pride and stubbornness almost kept him from asking, but the situation was too serious. "Sir, you seem to know these streets. Where would someone run if they're trying to disappear? Fast?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He pointed past the row of small shops. "If he's smart, he'll cut through the market yard, behind Johnson's store. There's a gate that's never locked, leads straight to the train tracks." The detective overheard and called it in immediately. "Units to the market yard block the south gate." Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady. "You won't have time to wait. If you move now, you'll catch him before he reaches the tracks." The tall officer hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Stay here. Do not follow." He motioned for his partner and sprinted toward the market, radio in hand. Marcus watched them go, then turned his head slightly. A shadow moved at the edge of the crowd, a man trying to slip away quietly while everyone else looked at the flashing lights. Marcus's instincts sharpened. The man's pace was too fast, his head too low. "Hey!" Marcus called, voice loud enough to cut through the noise. The man flinched and bolted. In an instant, Marcus reacted. He didn't chase him far, just enough to angle himself between the runner and the open sidewalk. "Stop!" he yelled, not as a command but as a warning to others nearby. People stepped back, giving space. The man tried to push past, but Marcus held his ground. He wasn't aggressive, he just moved with quick precision, blocking the path. The younger officer, returning from the alley, saw what was happening and ran to help. Together, they cornered the man until backup arrived. When two more officers cuffed the suspect, the younger one looked at Marcus, breathing hard. "How did you see him?" Marcus shrugged slightly. "You learn to notice when someone's moving wrong." A few minutes later, the tall officer returned, sweat on his forehead. "Second suspect down," he reported into his radio. "Good call on the market yard." He looked at Marcus, this time with open respect. "You just saved us a lot of trouble again." Marcus stayed calm, his voice even. "I just don't like seeing my neighborhood turned into a racetrack." The detective walked over, clearly recognizing Marcus now. "You're Marcus Reed, aren't you? Founder of Reed Tech? You're the one funding the youth center on Lincoln Avenue." Marcus gave a small nod, not eager for attention. "That's me." The detective exchanged a glance with the tall officer. The same man who, only minutes earlier, had doubted Marcus even owned his own car. Now both of them looked uneasy, embarrassed by how wrong they'd been. "You're going to need to give a full statement," the detective said, but his tone was far more respectful. "But first, are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus answered. He glanced toward the injured officer being helped into an ambulance. "Sure he's okay. That matters more." The younger officer swallowed hard, clearly moved by Marcus's calm focus on others. "You didn't have to do any of that," he murmured. "Most people would have walked away." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Walking away doesn't fix anything." The detective put a hand on his radio again as new information came through. "Both suspects secured. Weapons recovered. Scene is under control." The crowd, still buzzing with excitement, now started cheering softly. Some shouted Marcus's name, others simply said, "That man saved them." The phones never stopped, recording, catching every moment of Marcus standing tall, composed, while police rushed around him. The tall officer stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I misjudged you." Marcus looked him in the eye. "You did. But you corrected it. That's what counts." Before the officer could respond, more reporters and curious onlookers arrived. The street filled with flashing cameras and shouted questions. Marcus sighed inwardly. This was exactly the kind of attention he didn't want. Still, he stayed calm. He knew how stories like this could grow. He wasn't worried about his reputation. He was thinking about the message it sent, how quickly assumptions could turn dangerous, and how quickly they could change when people saw the truth. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, but inside the small room of the police station, silence pressed heavily on everyone. Marcus sat calmly, his hands still resting on the wooden table. Across from him, Officer Reed paced back and forth, his face pale, while Officer Daniels tried to avoid eye contact altogether. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Do you want to tell me why I was treated like a criminal for driving my own car?" Reed stopped pacing. We were just doing our job," he stammered, though even he didn't believe his own words. "We thought—" "You thought wrong," Marcus cut in. "And you didn't just make a mistake. You acted on it. You humiliated me in public. You shouted at me, handcuffed me in the street, in front of people recording." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "We're sorry, sir," he muttered. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Sorry isn't enough. Do you even know who I am?" Reed swallowed, hard. He had a feeling now. He had seen Marcus somewhere before. Then it hit him like lightning. He remembered seeing Marcus's face on a news article about young business leaders. You're Marcus Cole, Reed said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Yes, CEO of Cole Innovations, a company that employs hundreds of people in this city. And you decided I looked suspicious because of the car I drive? Daniel's mouth went dry. We didn't mean... Marcus raised a hand to stop him. You didn't mean to, but you still did. And I'm not the kind of man who stays quiet when something is wrong. Just then, the station door opened. A tall man in a dark suit walked in, followed by two city officials. His calm, sharp gaze swept across the room, stopping at Marcus. Mr. Cole, the man said respectfully. I'm Deputy Mayor Stevens. I came as soon as I heard. Reed and Daniels exchanged nervous glances. Why would the deputy mayor come here in the middle of the night? Stevens turned to them. Do you have any idea who you just arrested without cause? This man is one of our city's biggest contributors. He funded the new youth center last year. He works closely with our office. Reed's knees felt weak. He wished the ground would open up and swallow him whole. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just sat there, calm and composed. Deputy Mayor, thank you for coming. But I'm not here for special treatment. I'm here because this shouldn't happen to anyone, no matter who they are. The room grew even more tense. Stevens nodded slowly. You're right. And this will be addressed immediately. Daniel suddenly spoke, his voice trembling. Sir, please, we didn't know. If we had known Marcus's eyes hardened. If you had known who I was, you'd have acted differently. That's exactly the problem. Reed felt sweat on his forehead. He had been on the force for 10 years, but never had he felt this much pressure. Not from a suspect, not even from his superiors. Stevens turned to Marcus. Do you want to press charges? Marcus hesitated. He looked at the two officers, both now visibly shaken. He could see their fear, but he also saw something else. Shame. Maybe this could be more than just punishment. Maybe it could be a lesson. I don't want them behind bars, Marcus finally said. But I do want an official apology. And I want them to attend community training sessions. They need to understand the people they serve. Reed nodded quickly, relief washing over him. We'll do it. Anything you ask, sir? Daniels spoke, too, his voice quiet but sincere. We're truly sorry. We didn't see you. We just saw what we assumed, and we were wrong. Marcus stood up, his presence commanding. Good, because next time, it might not be someone like me who has connections or influence. Next time, it could be a young man walking home from work, and he won't have anyone to call. The words hit like a hammer. Daniels lowered his head. Reed felt a lump in his throat. Stevens gave Marcus a firm handshake. You've handled this with more grace than most would, Marcus replied softly. Grace is easy. What's hard is changing people's hearts. As they walked out of the station together, the wind outside carried the first light rain of the night. For Reed and Daniels, it felt like the storm had broken inside them too, a storm of guilt and realization. Back in the empty room, the two officers sat in silence. Daniels, Reed finally said, voice low, we really messed up. Yeah, Daniels replied, staring at the floor. But maybe we can fix it. Maybe we have to. Reed nodded slowly. He wasn't sure how, but he knew one thing. They'd never look at people the same way again. Outside, Marcus stepped into his car. The same car that had started this whole mess. But now it didn't feel like just a car. It felt like a reminder that respect should never depend on who someone is or what they own. He drove off into the night, headlights cutting through the rain, unaware that this incident would soon be all over the news. And when the city woke up to the headlines, the story would not just be about a wrongful stop. It would be about a man who chose dignity over anger, and two officers who were forced to confront their own mistakes. The evening sky glowed orange as Daniel drove back home. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was restless. The memory of the morning still replayed in his head, the flashing police lights, the harsh voices, and the sudden change when they realized who he was. It bothered him deeply, not because they stopped him, but because of the reason they did. Inside his large but quiet home, Daniel dropped his keys on the table. The silence felt heavy. Usually, he would relax with music or call a friend, but tonight, he felt like thinking. He walked to the window, staring at the city lights, and whispered to himself, "Why do they always judge first?" His phone rang. It was Sarah, his close friend who always cared for him like family. "Daniel, I heard what happened this morning," she said quickly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Sarah," Daniel replied calmly. "But something feels wrong about it. They didn't even ask my name before accusing me." "You should speak up," she urged. "This isn't just about you. People need to know how these things happen." Daniel stayed quiet. He didn't like attention, but Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Maybe he did need to speak up, not with anger, but with calm truth. The next day, Daniel went to his office. His assistant, Mark, looked worried. "Sir, the video of the incident is everywhere online," Mark said, showing him his phone. The clip showed the officers stopping Daniel, demanding his papers, and then changing their tone as soon as they saw who he was, a respected businessman, the owner of a company that even supplied cars to the city police department. Daniel sighed. "This is why I don't like cameras. They show everything." "But this can change something," Mark replied. "People are already talking." By afternoon, Daniel received a call from the police chief himself. "Mr. Carter," the chief said in a serious voice, "I want to apologize for what happened yesterday. The officers, they didn't handle it well." Daniel spoke calmly. "Chief, it's not about me. I'm safe. But what if it was someone else? Would they have been treated the same?" The chief paused. "I understand what you're saying. We need to meet. Can you come to the station tomorrow?" Daniel agreed. That night, Sarah came over with food, as she often did when she knew he was troubled. "Why are you so calm about this?" she asked, handing him a plate. "Because anger won't fix anything," Daniel replied softly. "I want to do something better, something that makes them think before judging people." Sarah smiled. "That's why you're different. You don't fight with noise, you fight with sense." The next morning, Daniel arrived at the police station. Reporters were outside shouting questions, but he ignored them and walked in quietly. The chief welcomed him to his office. "We've started an internal review," the chief explained. "The two officers admitted they judged you based on your car and, well, other things. They're sorry." Daniel looked him in the eye. "Chief, I don't want their apology. I want them to learn. Not just them, all of them. Can we start a program? Teach officers to check facts before assuming things." The chief nodded slowly. "That's actually a good idea. If you're willing to help us design it." Daniel agreed. He didn't just want to protect himself. He wanted to protect people who had no voice, who couldn't defend themselves when wrongly judged. Later that day, Daniel met the two officers privately. They looked nervous, expecting anger. "Mr. Carter," one of them said quietly, "we're truly sorry. We thought the car didn't fit the driver." Daniel didn't shout. He simply asked, "And why did you think that? Because it was expensive? Or because of me?" The officers looked down, ashamed. "We didn't think. We just assumed." "Exactly," Daniel said softly. "And assumptions can hurt people. I'm not angry with you, but I want you to promise me, next time, check the facts first. Don't jump to conclusions. Both officers nodded, their voices low. "We promise." That evening, Daniel stood before a small press gathering. He didn't want fame, but he knew this was important. "I was stopped yesterday," he told the reporters, "but this isn't about me. This is about what happens when people judge too quickly. We all deserve respect, no matter what car we drive, what clothes we wear, or how we look. I've spoken with the police, and we're starting something new, training to make sure this doesn't happen again." His words were calm but powerful. People listened. Even those who didn't. No Daniel before admired him now. He wasn't just rich. He was wise, fair, and willing to turn a bad moment into something good. As the cameras flashed, Sarah watched from the side with pride. She whispered, "That's the Daniel I know. Always thinking about others first." Daniel smiled slightly as he left the press area. He knew the journey wasn't over. Changing how people think would take time. But this was a start, and he was ready to see it through. The evening sun dipped low on the horizon as David stood outside the police station. His car was parked neatly across the street, the same car that had caused so much trouble just hours before. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, but David's mind was restless. He replayed everything that had happened, the flashing lights, the confusion, the panic on the officers' faces. Inside the station, officers Mark and Steve sat in a small office waiting for the chief to arrive. Both men looked pale and shaken. Neither spoke. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan felt louder than usual. Mark rubbed his hands together nervously while Steve kept staring at the floor, lost in thought. When the chief finally entered, his face was serious. He had already read the report. He had also spoken to David. Without wasting time, he got straight to the point. "Do you both understand what happened today?" the chief asked firmly. Mark swallowed hard. "Sir, we stopped him because we thought—" "You thought?" the chief interrupted. "You thought wrong. You judged him because of the car he was driving. That man you stopped is not only innocent, he's also a respected businessman and someone who has donated to this very department." Steve lowered his head in shame. "We didn't mean to cause trouble, sir. It just seemed unusual at first." The chief shook his head. "Unusual doesn't give you the right to treat someone unfairly. Do you realize how quickly this could have gone bad? Do you realize who you were talking to?" Both officers stayed silent. They had already seen David's calm yet commanding presence when he spoke to them earlier. They had realized too late that he wasn't just another driver. The chief continued, his voice softer now but still firm. "Mr. David Harris is an investor. He's a man who has built companies from the ground up. He's someone who has worked with the mayor and helped fund community programs, including youth training for law enforcement. And you stopped him on the side of the road because his car looked too expensive." Mark closed his eyes briefly. "We're sorry, sir," he said quietly. "Your apology isn't for me," the chief said. "It's for him." Outside, David leaned against his car, watching people walk by. He wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. When the chief called him inside, David entered calmly. Mark and Steve stood up right away. Their eyes met David's, and both men looked genuinely regretful. "Mr. Harris," the chief said, "these two have something to say to you." Mark spoke first. "Sir, we're truly sorry for stopping you without reason. We made a quick judgment and it was wrong. You showed us more patience than we deserved." Steve nodded quickly. "I agree. We learned a big lesson today. We hope you can forgive us." David studied them for a moment. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. "You know, when you stopped me, I could see the doubt in your eyes. You didn't see a man, you just saw something that didn't fit. That's dangerous. Not just for me, but for anyone. You need to do better, not just because of who I am, but because it's the right thing to do." Both officers nodded. David continued, "I don't hold grudges, but I do expect change. Next time you see someone driving a car, you don't expect them to drive. Remember today, don't jump to conclusions. Ask questions first. Respect comes before suspicion. The chief gave David a small nod of approval. Well said. There was a brief silence in the room. The tension eased slightly, but the message was clear. Mark and Steve weren't just embarrassed. They were humbled. Before leaving, David surprised everyone. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, and handed it to the officers. If you two ever want to see what real hard work looks like, visit my office. I'd be glad to show you how I earned that car. Maybe you can take something from it. The officers looked stunned. They had expected anger, not an open hand. As David walked back to his car, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a calm evening glow. The air felt lighter. He opened the door, sat behind the wheel, and for a moment just smiled to himself. Back in the office, Steve whispered to Mark, "Can you believe that guy? After all that, he's offering to help us." Mark nodded slowly. Yeah. Makes you wonder who really needed to be taught a lesson today. The chief overheard and gave them both a pointed look. You're lucky he's a man of patience and principle. Don't make me have this conversation again. Later that night, David drove through the quiet streets, thinking about the day. He thought about how quickly assumptions could turn into problems. He also thought about how, with a little understanding, people could change. The city lights reflected on the sleek hood of his car as he pulled into his driveway. The world outside was still full of misunderstanding, but tonight, 2 officers had walked away wiser. And maybe, just maybe, the next person they stopped wouldn't have to go through what he did. David closed his garage door, stepped inside his home, and felt a quiet sense of peace. Justice, he thought, didn't always come from punishment. Sometimes it came from teaching someone a better way, and as he poured himself a glass of water, he couldn't help but smile again. A minute later they were begging, he thought to himself. But maybe that minute was worth something after all.